the room, and we are so happy to have Eric Reese from What Works Cities here from the Government Excellence team at Johns Hopkins to tell us more about the What Works Cities program in Lincoln, Nebraska. Welcome, Eric, and thank you, Rick and Tom, for being here as well.
Great. So thank you all for having me. I've had a great couple of days here in Lincoln, and I'm excited to share with you the good work that we've been doing with the team so far on the What Works Cities program, and also what's to come for Lincoln in the What Works Cities program. So what I'm going to do really briefly is go through some background on what is the What Works Cities program, and then get into a little bit more detail about what we have been doing in Lincoln to date, and then what comes next. So What Works Cities is a Bloomberg Philanthropies initiative designed to accelerate cities' use of data and evidence to improve people's lives. So there's really three pieces of that we focus on at Bloomberg, and our team is really the word accelerate. We're trying to make what cities do better, faster, cheaper, more efficiently, not recreate the wheel and not bring new programs, but actually to accelerate what you're doing. You see the word use underlined there. We're really focusing on how we're using data and evidence. It's not inherently valuable. We have to use it to make it valuable. And then the last piece, the literal bottom line of improving people's lives being the goal for government. Everything that we do should have that in mind. And that's what we try to center ourselves on in terms of the What Works Cities program. And you'll see in the photo there kind of our motto, in God we trust, all others bring data. And really having that being the kind of backbone of everything that we do being shaped and formed by the data we have. To date, we're working in 55 cities across the country, and these are mid-sized cities, what we define between 100,000 and a million in population. So we get some pretty big cities and some smaller ones, but we chose those cities based on demand and some work that Bloomberg had done, determining that cities of that size really had different challenges than bigger cities like New York or Chicago, and that they needed different solutions and that they could learn from one another. And we've really focused on these four areas: open data, performance and analytics, results-driven contracting, and low-cost evaluation. And here in Lincoln, we've been working on open data and performance and analytics, so I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more depth. I would also like to note that this is an application program and selection process where Lincoln has been one of the cities selected. Not all cities that apply are selected, and we are very careful about choosing the places where we work, where we want to be successful. And I think that Lincoln's work to date set it up for a lot of great success in the past through staff and other things, and we are really looking forward to what's coming next based on the work that people have done leading up to this. Just so you all have a sense of the folks that are doing this, so this is a grant program from Bloomberg, and they are kind of the umbrella parent organization, but there are a variety of other partners that participate, including Johns Hopkins, GovX, that's me. We also have folks from the Results for America team that have been working with Lincoln on communications and coordination. And then the Sunlight Foundation has been a really good partner in terms of open data policy across the country, and they're a real thought leader in terms of what are the kind of things that open data practitioners should be focused on. The Behavioral Insights team and the Harvard Kennedy School focus on a couple of very specific things, being the results-driven contracting and low-cost evaluation work. So I'm not going to talk in depth about them, but we do have a variety of partners from across the country that are engaged in this work with cities. I want to spend a little bit of time focusing on the two areas that we've chosen to work with in Lincoln. So one is open data, and the challenge being that governments have a ton of data and information that the public is interested in, but often they don't know how to interact with it. And our solution for that is opening up more data and developing policy guidelines and practice to help do that in a structured, useful, valuable way. So we've been doing that in Lincoln to date, and Tom has been leading that work. Tom and the team, we just came from a really great training where we're starting to figure out the kind of guidelines that Lincoln is going to use for actually opening their data in a safe and valuable way. We've also been working on performance and analytics, and so this challenge is one that you all are very familiar with, that governments are constantly asked to do more with what you have, or I don't like saying do more with less, but that's basically the mantra that has been prescribed for government, and bringing data and evidence into those conversations can help you do that better. So I've been working with Rick as well as a variety of other folks on a performance management framework to help bring more data into the conversations to make better decisions, and then to also inform folks as they go on to make sure that we're having the impacts that we want to have. So as I described really briefly, In a little bit more depth, we've been launching a program on performance called LNKStat, where we're really looking to focus on how are we using our data, how are we having conversations about our data, and how are we connecting the past work done on taking charge in the budget process to really inform outcomes and the daily work of staff in the city. And then on the open data front, we've been working to launch Lincoln's open data program in coordination with the resolution that was passed by the council. So that includes inventorying the key data that the city has, building governance, but also then aligning open data with the LNKStat performance program so that folks know how decisions are being made and that we're doing that in an open way for all citizens of Lincoln. So I'm going to stop there and hand it over to Rick and Tom to talk a little bit more depth about what we've been doing so far on the open data and performance fronts here in Lincoln.
Open data is the project that I'm kind of leading here for the city, at least temporarily. We formed a governance committee. It's composed of 17 people right now, probably will grow a little bit beyond that. And that includes both city staff and also some members of the public. We have a representative from the Community Health Endowment, for example, a UNL journalism professor, reporter from the Journal-Star, and another member of the Public Policy Center at UNL is participating as well.
An architect. And Steve Miller, the architect, who's just...
I'm sorry?
The architect who's joined us from the private sector.
Yes, Steve Miller from Barvermeer Hacker, BVH Architects is a member. So we got good public representation on it already, and we've had our first meeting and our first training now. We'll be scheduling our second meeting coming up here probably within the next couple of weeks. But our goal is to make data sets that the city already owns more readily available to our citizens. We also think that open data is going to have some value in making that data more accessible to our own employees by dropping some of the barriers to getting to that data now. And I just thought I might show you a little project that a few of us have been working on in preparation for this. This is always risky doing live demos. But we've worked on standing up an open data web page for the city. This is just an example of that. It's not the final cut by any means. It'll show you what this concept might look like. This looks very similar, for example, to what Wichita has done. And this open data site was just developed as a model so that we could show it to other members of the governance committee. And it incorporates links to our performance data, how we're doing on the city's various goals, for example. And also open data that's available for download. We think we'll be able to put a lot of data up there that can be categorized for citizens to access. For example, I'll do a search term. How about city limits? Here are open data sets that we've got that relate to the city limits. You can open up some of these data sets and easily download them and manipulate them. And again, I think we've only got 24 in here right now, but there is no reason that this is going to be a few hundred from data that we already own.
Can citizens download those too if they want to work with them, or are they a
that's the whole
static type
concept, is to make this
presentation?
available so that citizens can download it. So I opened up last year's traffic collisions, 2015 traffic collisions, and it's 8,800 records, and anyone that wanted to download that could just click the download button and select the format that they want. Spreadsheet would be a good logical one.
So you put it into an Excel spreadsheet and then,
This would export an Excel spreadsheet to your own computer.
great.
And this was done pretty much over the course of a weekend. So we think we've got some real potential here because the city already has so much data. And another thing we did on this page is we also brought together some of the existing data and applications that the city already has. These are some of those featured applications. And then here's a more extensive list of applications that we already have, data applications that we already have. But that most people wouldn't know about because they're really you have to navigate through lots of different city department websites to find these applications. And for example, I found one that I really liked, that I didn't know existed. And I thought I knew quite a bit about what the city had on the web, but I didn't realize that the planning department had this application called What's Up in Lincoln that really shows you the details on development projects that are underway in the city, both public and private. And it's just a really cool little application that provides you with that information. I see these projects underway all the time in Lincoln and I wonder what they're doing there. And with this application, you can just click and see, oh, well, that's the expansion to South Point Pavilions. So we already own quite a bit, and I think there's a consensus among at least the city representatives on the governance committee that we can accomplish a lot without any additional resources simply by making the data that we already have more readily available, searchable, and downloadable for the general public. And that's what we'll be up to over the course of the next few months before we make our first report to the City Council on July 1st, as required by the resolution.
I'd like to invite Eric maybe to give you just a little background on what some of the private sector folks are doing with this data that is available, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it, and I also want to take a moment. So Tom said that this was done over the course of a weekend. I think that is understating the amount of work that the team has
It's a long weekend.
has put in, because I think Tom and other folks on the governance committee and on the team have put in a lot of effort to being really thoughtful about this and making good decisions about how the data is made available. And I've seen across the cities across the country a variety of uses of these data. Just a couple that I know off the top of my head are in terms of what people consider easy, and what Tom showed you, some applications where folks can access data and see maps. I've also seen it integrated into existing private sector application. I don't know how many of you use Yelp. If you're going to go use a restaurant, you can see ratings and menu and whatever. There are ways to integrate the public health information on the health score into that application so that the government data is available to citizens on what they're already using to make decisions and find information. So I think that's a really big usage. And I've seen a lot of other folks, just especially in the traffic area, building apps, building things that integrate with Google to make sure that folks are able to see the authoritative source of information, the government information, in places where they're already gaining knowledge and gaining information for their own use. So I think there's a variety of places where open data can be really useful.
We just spent the morning in a open data, what we called an open data boot camp. It was a training for the governance committee, and we also invited other city staff to that. We had 7 of the city department directors attended of their own volition. A lot of interest, but one of the members of the governance committee at the end, when we were kind of asking people to sum up what you think the value of open data is, used a really key word. He said trust. And it happened to be a member of the news media that's on the committee that said that. And I got to tell you, from my standpoint, he had just echoed what I had just told Lyrian about what I think one of the primary benefits of open data is, and that is that when you provide your data, you make it easy for people to find, easy for them to use. It increases trust.
How does this all factor in with things like HIPAA and certain informational barriers, so to speak, or preventative things to protect people's security, health, and so forth?
That's a great question, and we actually talked a lot about that today at our training with folks in the staff, because they are very conscious of that we don't want to be releasing information that we shouldn't be releasing. And I think that most cities that I've worked with come up with a couple of different categories of information that we want to protect and keep internal. So one is HIPAA information that we are required by law to not release. There is additional information that we think might be sensitive, that might not be, we could release it if we wanted to, but we might want to think twice about that, especially related to public safety. There's a lot of information where we don't want to be releasing, or we at least want to review before we release that information. So there are a variety of things, and what we talked about today at the training is building in workflows to include those considerations in every data set that we review before we publish it. We need to be having a legal review every time, and we usually need to be reviewing for content and value as well.
Well, if there are any more questions on open data, I might take a moment and talk to you a little bit about what we've been doing on the performance management side of our work with What Works Cities.
I just want to mention for John's sake too that there is a member of the law department on the governance committee, and that she's hyper-focused on making sure that we are very sensitive to that issue, and she's going to make sure we're complying with state law.
Yes, as all good lawyers do, they let us know when we were
Yes.
going too
Yeah.
far, well before we did. So I appreciate her
And she
perspective.
already has,
Yes.
Yeah,
by
yeah.
informing me that it's probably subject to the Public Meetings Act, and we need to do that at our next meeting. So she's doing a good job.
Have a couple of us up here who are lawyers too. So.
Yeah, perfect.
We had about 130 people attend yesterday to our first training on performance management and this whole new LNKStat system, which will connect taking charge the day-to-day work of what our staff is doing. Okay, the quick and easy reason why we're doing this comes from a business management guru named Patrick Lencioni, who says the only measure of a great team or a great organization is whether it accomplishes what it sets out to accomplish. And that's what we're trying to get done here. I think you're all aware and probably know taking charge as our annual budget exercise. Unfortunately, where I think we've kind of missed the boat is not better conveying both to you all and the public that what taking charge actually is the beginnings of our performance management system. The intent was to set a course for how we accomplish various tasks and then use that information to connect it to people's work so that we're always striving and moving in a direction that takes us down the road and allows us to have some measurement of success as we move forward. So this chart just demonstrates to you a little bit about what I was talking about. The taking charge did establish outcomes. There are 8 of them, and I'll run through them quickly just to jog your memory. Safety and security, economic opportunity, livable neighborhoods, healthy and productive people, environmental quality, efficient transportation, identity linking, and accountable government. And within those 8 outcome areas, there's 3 to 6 goals that we seek to accomplish. For instance, in safety and security, the first 2 are maintain a low crime rate and timely and effective incident management, i.e. response times, things of that nature. When we started this out, it worked pretty well to at least have the conversations about these pieces as part of the budget hearings. And I think you all probably recognize that more readily at the presentation by the health department, by the parks department, by police, who were very used to this type of system where you talked about data and how it drove the decisions that were being made in terms of their staffing and how they were allocating their budget resources. But we had two problems that were kind of hanging us up here. Number one was not the rest of the departments didn't have an adequate amount of training to really implement it day to day. And number 2, we moved to a biennial budget, which was a good thing, but it meant now we were only really talking about our goals and the data that supported those goals every other year. So the question became, how do you link those things up with day-to-day performance? And lo and behold, that's what we're trying to get done with LNKStat, where LNKStat will be the data collection analysis and the process for continuous review of the taking charge performance management system that we put in place, those outcomes and goals. In short, are we maintaining a low crime rate? Are we having an effective and timely incident management response? So where the system comes into play is a series of meetings that we will do throughout the year, every year, to try to review progress on those 8 outcome areas. There'll be 12 LNKStat meetings a year, divided into 2 groups of 6, where we will review all the 8 outcome areas. And during one of these meetings, what's kind of unique about it is that the departments that are involved with that outcome area all meet together to focus on a problem or to focus on the data. And I shouldn't say problem because you focus on more than that. You focus on where you're going. It isn't just to solve problems. It's to collaborate on where we want to take the city. So for instance, the safety and security area, one of the goals is youth activity. So right off the bat, you have kind of a new thing where different departments are collaborating. And where most of our youth programming is in the Parks and Recreation Department. So you'll have 911, police, fire, public works, and parks sitting down to talk about what we hope to accomplish in the safety and security area. Okay. This is an important slide, I think, in light of the outstanding conversation that we had on Monday. We had a really good discussion about how we were going to manage the interaction between the administration and the city council on the budget. And we had talked to you a little bit about our thoughts about having some meetings in January and February with all of you. And one of the things that we'd like to do is after the LNKStat meeting, and I'll describe in a minute the kind of product that will emerge from there that you'll have access to, we'd like to reprise those meetings with you. The idea being that in January and February, we take that 10,000-foot look at, this is where we're at. How are we doing on crash data? Our goal is to have 850 crashes or less per 100,000 residents. Are we meeting that goal? And what changes to our programming do we have to make if we're not meeting that goal? If we are meeting that goal, do we need to change our target area? Things of that nature. And from those things, we think what will emerge is a description of the types of things that departments will be looking for in their next budget submittal. So it's a real opportunity for us to talk not just about the data, but the projects and programs that people are enacting at the city level that hopefully make us a better and smarter community. So we hope that these meetings are also the starting point for the mayor's budget instructions. So you go through this process, you lay out what the data says, you lay out what the need is, you talk through how we think we can set a direction to solve any challenges that we have and move the city forward, and hopefully that begins to start the process of what we're going to do on the budget. I always put Winston Churchill things into my presentations because I'm kind of a World War II file. Whenever anything's on cable, I turn it on, and so you have to get stuck with my little neurosis here. But I do think that his quote here is really important to what we're talking about. That it's great to have a well thought out strategy, but if you're not looking at results once in a while, that isn't really helping. So what we're trying to do is develop a means that's very easy for the leadership of the community to look at right away and understand what we're doing. And we're doing that for a couple of reasons. Number one, we don't anticipate at this point having additional staff resources. So right now we've tried to automate this process as much as we possibly can, the data analysis, and make it highly visual so we can have quick understandings of where things go. So some of the data reports that will be generated automatically will give us a view of the status and trends of the various performance indicators, and we'll use a simple stoplight system to inform you about our progress. For instance, on what I mentioned on the crash data, we're well under that mark of 850 per 100,000, so that's a green light. For those indicators that show we might be meeting the target, but there's some trends that concern us, we might put a yellow light. And for things that we're just not hitting at this point, we might put together a red light. And it's important at this point to point out that status and trends are two different concepts. You might be meeting the goal of the performance indicator, but it might be going in terms of trend in the wrong direction, and you want to address that early so we can continue to maintain progress in that area. So we have developed, we is sort of a misnomer here, let's just be honest. While I was able to outline what the process is, a very talented person in our health department, Raju Kakarlapudi, who is a name you should really remember because he's just one of the brighter people in government, one of those folks you think to yourself, wow, I'm glad he's on our team, developed this tool that I'm going to show you a little bit of to help us with this evaluation. Before the start of the round of each LNKStat meeting, Raju's tool will take a look at the data and will assign that green light, red light, yellow light concept and show some of the trend data. Now I apologize for the size of this. This is a screenshot, but I'll try and let you know what it does. This is in the safety and security outcome area. And if you see across the top, it lists the department, the city attorney, okay, the indicator in safety and security that we're holding them accountable for, maintain prosecution conviction rate in county court above 90%. And you'll see over here a green light because in 2015 they were hitting that mark at 98%. Okay, so that's one of those things that is going pretty well for us. By contrast, and this is no surprise to anyone, as we know, as our city has grown, it's become more difficult for emergency services to reach the edges of our community. Looking at this one in Lincoln Fire Rescue, our ambulance response of 90% of the time in at least 8 minutes. Right in 2015, we were just under 90%, 89.42. So that gave us a red light. And as importantly, you can see here from the trend that the 3-year trend has started to go the wrong direction for us. Now, obviously, we're working on that with the fire station relocation program, but this is an indication of the type of report that will come to us and ultimately to you to give you that kind of background as to where we're going as a community on key facts. John, you look like you had a question.
I got a question. Go back. That first line you just went over on the city attorney's office. Did you say, I can't read it quite from here, but you said a conviction rate? That's
Correct.
our goal? That we want to
in
convict,
county
or is
court,
it process?
above 90%, and our current one is 98%.
So you might as well plead guilty.
That's, I think.
Or the flip side of that, somebody who looks at statistics like I do, maybe they're just not bringing every case they could.
And that's an excellent point. And a point that I think really is part of why we want to talk about this data at meetings like with the mayor and with all of you. Because the point you're making, Councilman Christensen, is a question you should ask. Because if they aren't doing it the way we think they ought to be doing it, it has impacts not only on how we're putting together our staff, but our budget as well. Okay?
And just seeing this report led you to think of that question.
Yes,
You might not have otherwise
exactly.
occurred to
Well, I
ask.
almost ought to break it down into how many cases, as Roy was suggesting, and then also just how many are the numbers that are processed, because even though you're not getting the convictions, there may be other factors involved. So it's kind of several tiers within that.
And I think those are the probing things that we want you to ask, that'll make this better and make our folks more responsive to what your needs and concerns are. Okay, so we're going to send this report to each of the departments about 10 days before the meeting, and their job will be to take a look at each of those indicators and provide some analysis and recommended actions, okay? And that's an important component of this. They're going to look at all those pieces and tell us, from their point of view, what needs to happen next and give us some background. There'll be an online form where they take a look at this and fill it in. So, for instance, on this one, going back to that traffic crash rate, traffic crash rate, excuse me, you see that we're doing pretty well here. You see the trend was bad a few years ago, but the last 7 or 8 has been very good. Then the departments are going to put in a quick little analysis piece. This one says the data is still very good, but trend showed an increase of 30 events. Further analysis suggests the increase was primarily associated with Southwest Lincoln, but does not appear to correlate with significant change of conditions or policy. Now, I want to make clear here, especially the media, that that's made up. That was an example for all of you, okay? That is a real analysis. But the point is, that's the kind of stuff we're looking for. And we want them to give us just 2 or 3 lines of what's going on here. Now, in the next box, they give us their recommendations for action. Well, things are going okay and you don't feel like there need to be program adjustments, it's a one-word answer. Nothing, none, we move on. And this will help us in the mayor's office and the city council then decide what we want to talk about at the meeting. There's another point here, and that's a key point here as well. You can't talk about everything in an hour-and-a-half meeting. You just can't. You guys go through that phenomenon all the time. So what we do feel like is at these meetings, we narrow down the topical area to maybe 3 to 5 things so we can have a more focused discussion on things that might be a challenge. So right here, the directors are going to say to us, look, we think this should be an agenda item, or no, we don't think it needs to be an agenda item, okay? So they're going to tell us that. But then it'll shift, I'm going to go back, but then it'll shift to the mayor's office to decide, okay, we hear your recommendations, but we are interested in talking about that even if you aren't. Or I suspect there's going to be 15 types of yeses, I want that on the agenda, that we're going to have to narrow down to make it a manageable number at the conversation. But regardless of what we choose to have on the agenda, you still have a report that tells us how we're doing on the data and some analysis for every single indicator so that we can make some judgments about, look, do we want to talk about this more, even if we don't do it in the LNKStat setting? Okay, so to give you a sense of how the whole thing works, I mentioned that there's going to be a pre-memo report that gives the data and how we're doing. We'll review that information. Well, excuse me. They'll complete their pre-memo work, and then then we'll review the pre-memos together at the mayor's office and send an agenda to the departments about 5 to 6 days before the meeting. Then we would plan to have the meeting go forward, and I'll talk a little bit about what those are going to look like in a moment. But then the part that will also be very relevant to the city council was after that meeting is had, we're going to create a post memo. And the post memo is simply the pre-memo, which included the analysis, the recommendations for action, and then any decisions that were made at the meeting. Anything on strategy that we think we need to take going forward, we'll put down there and put that online so anyone can review it, particularly the staff. That's very important. But also bringing it to you so you can take a look at, hey, this is what we're thinking in terms of moving forward. It becomes the basis for the next LNKStat meeting because the idea here is follow-up. So we said we're going to do this. Now let's make sure that we're actually doing it. Then the process begins again. Now, because I didn't have space here, and I'll show it in the next slide, there's a piece missing here, which is then we'd like to come to you and reprise that meeting so that you can have some idea of what was discussed, and we can boil it down to a little quicker format and give you a little more detailed and nuance, and maybe cut out some of the things that weren't working during the presentation. So, as I just mentioned, we had really hoped that we could schedule pre-councils periodically, and we'll have to talk about how that format would go. But we really do see this as, if with some adjustments for all of you, as the kind of the first round of a budget discussion in the first year of a biennium. We take a look at these things, departments come in and talk to you not only about their data, but about their programming and how they're making progress on various issues. For instance, I can't imagine during safety and security, you wouldn't want to hear our public safety director tell you a little bit about where we're at on the station relocation program and the markers he's using to determine success on that particular piece. So this is an idea of the key questions, and intuitively, several of you went to them almost immediately about asking some deeper questions. And that's the whole point of this. Let's get in there and ask some questions to get a better product. So these are the type of things that we want to happen during these meetings. Why did you choose this? What factors affected the trend over time? What are we doing to move forward? Why did you recommend this as an agenda item? Probing questions about how they developed the data and how they organized the program that led to the data. Because I think that'll have a number of revealing things for all of us to consider as we decide the staffing and budgeting going forward. One final piece. This is going to be a constant work in process. I think I've showed you this cartoon before. Dilbert, where the tech says, hello, this is tech support. May I close your ticket now? And Dilbert says, no, you haven't helped me yet. I just called you. And the tech says, well, I'm not evaluating on how helpful I am. I'm evaluating on how many troubled tickets I close. There's a point to that. Data has to measure what you want it to measure to be effective. Okay, there are a lot of measures that don't necessarily get at the heart of the matter. And the quintessential government example is the Vietnam War. Does anyone remember from that era what we used as the measure of success?
Kills.
Body count. Right. And as a result of that, I think many would argue that the strategy the United States adopted did not really reflect that. It wasn't the right one because the type of performance measure that was being used. So that's very a critical part of this, is the data is going to change over time as we talk about, look, did this really hit the mark? Is this a piece of data that we're using that's really sending us in the right direction in terms of our strategy? So that's going to be a continuous part of the process. So that's kind of the quick, dirty 10,000-foot overview of what we're doing. I hope it wasn't too long-winded here. And certainly, if you have any questions about this or open data or some more information from Eric about What Works Cities, we'd love to talk about it.
LNKStat meetings are starting on the 25th of this month. Safety and security is the first one in the barrel, and after that, livable neighborhoods. And we're planning on those meetings being about an hour, hour and a half each.
Are those considered internal meetings, or I know in one example you had a stat meeting in another city, it was actually a public meeting. How are you looking at dealing with that in Lincoln?
At first, because we're kind of the pigs on roller skates who just started a system that has been invented from scratch, although I got to admit, I shouldn't say it like that. What Works Cities has done tremendous work to get us in the right direction. But we are trying out some new tools, and I think from my perspective, I want the staff to get comfortable with it before we start putting this roadshow public. So I was hoping that the first part would be kind of a dress rehearsal with the mayor's office, and then do something more public, coming to you all and talking about what was discussed at the meeting, and giving, as I said, reprising the meeting with all of you, which would obviously be in a public setting. So that's kind of the initial game plan. But I also can see as we evolve and get better at this, that perhaps we do have a model like Kansas City and some of the other communities, that the entire meeting from beginning to end is just open to the public.
Yep, and I would add on there the alignment with open data is a really important piece of that all the results of the meetings, no matter whether the meeting is public or, as Rick called it, a dress rehearsal, that the results and those dashboards and all the data associated with it will be available to the public to use, to scrutinize, to manipulate on their own as well. I've seen a variety of models in different cities. As Rick noted, Kansas City does all theirs publicly, but they've been doing it for a very long time, and so they are very comfortable with the tools. I think giving some time and space and letting folks become more comfortable with it is a really good plan in the short term, and I'm sure that you all have really good conversations moving forward based on what the data has told you, and then just what I've seen in the first, seeing one indicator and asking some really good probing questions. I'm sure there'll be very good conversations in the future.
And I think that's one of the key points to make here. What you don't want to do is make the staff feel like an examination of the data is somehow a judgment on how they're doing their jobs. I mean, there is an element of that, okay? But if they feel like this is, hey, am I going to get fired? Or, hey, my raise depends on how this data comes out, then we've kind of missed the point. The point is to have a collaborative conversation about how we improve our performance as a community. And we really want them to kind of get that ethos in place and understand what we're trying to do, so that they're feeling comfortable with the whole process.
So there'll be 8 meetings?
There'll be
on all-
6 meetings.
Okay.
4 of them will be 1 outcome apiece, and 4 of them will have 2 outcomes apiece. For instance, identity, Lincoln, and accountable government are smaller outcome areas with less programming, not quite as much to talk about. Whereas we could talk about safety and security probably over 6 meetings if we chose to.
We have a total of 27 performance indicators on safety and security.
Okay.
So, for accountable government, it's a handful. But, so we can do 2 of those outcome indicators at a single meeting for some of the smaller ones.
Okay.
Eric, you had used a phrase that caught my attention yesterday or Tuesday with the performance management training that was for all the city department leaders and a number of managers, and you mentioned something about it's not a tool of punishment or something like that. Can you elaborate on that point, because it seemed like an important one for everyone to feel encouraged to participate?
Yeah, I'm happy to elaborate on that. And yesterday's training was, from my perspective, very successful. That we had over 130 staff members come to learn about the LNKStat program and what's going to be coming forward. From my perspective, performance management has often been seen in the past as a punitive measure, either to fire folks or to somehow illuminate poor performance. And there is an element to that, as Rick said. We're going to be talking about performance. We're going to be talking about your data. And if things aren't looking good, we're going to have a conversation about that. But it should not be viewed only as a tool for punitive measures. It should be used as the basis of a conversation to say what is driving our performance, whether it's good or bad. And even, I think Tom mentioned, and Rick noted, one of the indicators where we're really below the benchmark on our crash data, for example, and we've been below it for 10 years. Is that benchmark really that valuable if we're meeting it every year without really changing anything that we're doing? Those are also conversations that should be had in their performance management setting and through this LNKStat to really analyze our progress and performance across the whole host of things in the city to solve problems and provide better services for citizens. Being, as I said, the bottom line for us is improving the lives of residents. That's how this performance management system should be viewed as well.
Is there a mechanism that you built into this about how to report this stuff to the public on a regular basis? Or is it just them looking to access it?
Well, it's again, as I mentioned, it's kind of a work in progress. I guess my vision was that we would come to you, and that's how we'd make it public. There'd
Okay.
be a release on the website too, so people could kind of take a look at it. Keep in mind that even now, as it exists, that the vast majority of what I'm talking about is available on the Taking Charge website. But as I mentioned, we still have some work to do on data. We're not reporting it as consistently and as thoroughly as we need to. We need to develop some new habits in order to make sure data is more quickly updated. And fortunately, as I mentioned, Raju and the health department is putting together just a stellar program that I think will help make that happen.
This world is filled with so much data, and you get an administrative overhead to process it. How do you protect against that so we suddenly don't become data movers and we're losing focus and time committed to our primary mission?
I think that that's a really interesting point as well, and actually something we talked about at the open data meeting today as well, that just dumping a lot of data out there and calling it open data isn't super valuable for the public or the residents, for the employees of the city. And so being really careful about prioritization, I think that focusing on the indicators and taking charge is a really good way to do that. These are the goals that we have set out for our city, and then tying them back through these conversations with you all will be a really big piece to say, are we spending the right amount of time that we should be? Maybe we should be spending more time on, on safety and security, and we're not hitting our measure. We need to spend more time there. and less on other things. I think that should be an ongoing conversation that you all are thinking about, especially through the budget process, as well as administration and staff and prioritizing their work. It should constantly be a piece of the conversation.
One of the things that was striking about the performance management gathering yesterday was that because everyone was in the same room, there were a lot of kind of hybrid conversations going on across departments. So I was sitting at a table with some librarians who started talking about homelessness and how they'd like to maybe collaborate with the police department for when they are dealing with maybe some of the same folks and understanding how to serve those needs. And it reminded me of Judy Halstead and Chad Blaha's presentation about collaborating public health and building and safety to deal with people who are displaced through the red tag process. I mean, what was really exciting was not just seeing what the performance indicator was for a department, but thinking about it as a community-wide effort and how the departments should be communicating and collaborating. So the cross-pollination effect of focusing on these statistics was that to me was really exciting.
That's helpful to me. I was going to ask Eric, how has this made a difference in the lives of people or communities from your experience? What have you seen?
So one of my favorite examples that's really tangible, and there are a variety of others, but is from the city of New Orleans, where they used the stat process extensively following Hurricane Katrina. Obviously, they had a huge disaster and a variety of blight in the city following that disaster. And what they decided to do was to combine data from a variety of sources across the city, including their 311, public health, police, building inspections. I think some animal control data was used as well to prioritize how they were going to remediate and eradicate blight in their community following this big disaster. Because, as we all know, blight isn't just blighted homes, it attracts crime, it does a variety of negative effects on neighborhoods. And what they decided to do was combine all that data and have a monthly meeting with all those folks in the same room to talk about what they were doing to target strategies. Not all blighted properties are created equal. Some need to be demolished, some need to be remediated, we need to get someone back in there into the home. And how are we going to target those strategies based on all the data we have from all these departments that combine to attack this problem? So I think that's a really good tangible example of a way you can use a stat process and data from across departments to solve a specific problem. And many other cities have been doing this across citywide agencies on a much more regular basis, as opposed to, in response to a disaster like it was in New Orleans, to use a similar process to solve challenges that they have in their cities as well.
Great.
Could you discuss briefly, too, the example from New York City about structural fires? Because, a natural disaster like Katrina may or may not ever happen in Lincoln, and hopefully it never does. But something like that was a smaller but also potent example of how this can be useful.
For sure. This is one of my favorite examples as well, and this comes from the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics that Michael Bloomberg founded when he was the mayor, where New York City is very dense, high population, a variety of things that make it very high risk for fires, a lot of old buildings as well. And so what they decided to do in the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics was combine data from a variety of sources: public health, 311 complaints, police complaints and responses, among other things, including the structural, age of the buildings and such, and occupancy, to create a list of what they considered the highest risk buildings for fire, and then use that list to prioritize their inspections instead of whatever they were doing before, which was probably based on time or whenever the schedule said they were supposed to inspect buildings. And just by changing out the list that inspectors used to go on their daily or weekly work in inspecting buildings, they reduced the casualties and they reduced property loss by 17% in 1 year, just by using data to provide a different list to inspectors, a different prioritization of how they would inspect buildings instead of whatever they were doing before. So I think those are the kind of powerful daily uses of data that really don't end up changing a lot for the regular fire inspector in that case, but can make a big difference in terms of the quality of service that's being provided.
And you're headquartered at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore.
Yes, that's correct.
Is Baltimore one of your cities in the 140 array?
It is.
So we've heard over years that Baltimore's had some municipal challenges. How long have you been working on a similar program there for open data, and have you noticed effects, results?
So our program has only been around since 2015. So we started working with Baltimore last year. And so Baltimore has a variety of challenges, and many of our cities have challenges as well. One of the cities we work with is Jackson, Mississippi. it's a very challenged community for a variety of reasons. And what our perspective is that we go work with cities at whatever level they are, as long as they kind of show a commitment and an ability and willingness to change, we'll go and provide work assistance with them. So we have been working with Baltimore, and to be honest, this work can be very impactful, but there are still big challenges in Baltimore, including around economic development, around how are we interacting with communities of color in the city that a STAT program isn't going to address, or open data isn't going to address. It can help to alleviate some of those and uncover issues, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of hard work to be done by elected leadership and by staff to continue to those, and STAT and open data are just kind of a forum to air those things and make decisions going forward.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation.
for the
For the work that
opportunity.
you've been
Thanks very
doing. I know you've taken on a lot of extra work here too, Tom and Rick, so thank you. And we're really, really so grateful to be chosen as a What Works city.
We could not have done this without them, so I do really appreciate Eric being here and the team being involved. Thank you.
Good.
And Eric, you're welcome to take some free air conditioning home with you.
I'll do my best. I feel like it's required, right? It just comes with you whether you want it or not. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.